What's up everybody, Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports here, and today I wanted to bring you guys a video talking about the new 2021 Ford Raptor. Before we jump in, I do want to put a quick disclaimer in and say that I'm aware that there's 100 other YouTube channels out there that already have videos on the 2021 Raptor going through every little spec and detail that Ford had as soon as it was released. And this is just not going to be one of those videos. This video is going to be a lot more focused on me talking about the new changes in the Raptor, just our general thoughts on it, what we like and dislike about the way the Raptor is going or the direction that Ford's taking it, and where this new model is headed. So we will talk about a lot of the specs and changes, but this isn't going to be the video for you if you want every single little engineering detail on this truck. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to the actual details of talking about the new Raptor. And the first thing I want to cover is the kind of updated visual design on this truck. Obviously, for this third generation of the Raptor, Ford had some work to do to kind of update the truck and make it stand out a little bit from the previous two generations. And you can tell that they definitely wanted this to still line up with the new 2021 F-150 in styling. It comes through a lot in the headlights and taillights and kind of the overall shape of the vehicle. So there's still a lot of heritage there for where the Raptor comes from as an F-150 platform, but I think it looks really nice. I know a lot of folks are a little concerned that this new design is maybe more conservative. Certainly in the F-150, it's more conservative than previous generations, and Ford didn't do anything crazy in the styling department, but I think the new Raptor looks really good, and I'm maybe a bit more drawn to this third gen than I was to the second gen, although I know a lot of people really like the second gen front ends. I think it'll still age really well. One of the things that I'm a big fan of is the new headlight design, and I really like how that DRL kind of makes a hook shape and swoops up around the top of the light to meet the three grille lights in the center. It looks very clean. The lines lead really nicely. It's a very bold front end. And since there's not a lot of painted panels or things breaking up the grille and the headlights, you get kind of one large panel across the front, or at least the appearance of a large panel. And I think it's pretty bold. It looks really good in my personal opinion, which, like I said, truck design is all beauty in the eye of the beholder. I don't expect everybody to love it, but I think that this truck will probably age pretty well. I also think that the back end looks good. Once again, nothing really crazy happened back there. You still get the big flared fenders front and rear. They changed the vents just a touch on the sides of the hood, and then the tail lights and everything are obviously updated and a little bit more reminiscent of the new F-150s as well. So in the styling department, I think the new Raptor is pretty solid. Moving away from the exterior and talking about the interior for just a moment, obviously the new Raptor shares the same cabin interior elements as the new F-150, and that means that it's been completely redesigned for this generation with a couple different changes. You can get different seats, there's different stitching, and a new kind of graphical user interface to the gauges and stuff in this truck, and Raptor logos everywhere. So that does change it a bit from the regular F-150, but overall I think Ford's redesign looks really clean on the inside. The layout of the buttons and gauges and everything is very clean as well. And I think they did a nice job of keeping the interior feeling like a truck interior, or at least feeling somewhat substantial and not completely falling into just a luxury vehicle interior that you'd expect in a Lincoln or something like that. So even though these trucks do come loaded like luxury vehicles now, it's nice that it still has some F-150 feel to it on the inside. Now, the next big section that has been super upsetting for a lot of fans of the Raptor and just truck fans in general is the powertrain choice from Ford. The third generation of Raptor is set to come out with that 3.5 liter EcoBoost twin turbo V6 that the second generation had, and a lot of people are super upset that there's not a V8. But Ford did kind of retcon on that, and there is a Raptor R that's going to be coming out later that will have a V8 in it. So I think most people are waiting for that truck to come along before they make any decisions on whether or not they want to swap out of their current Raptor into a new one or make that jump from an F-150 into a Raptor, whatever that may be. So we'll see what happens when we find out more information about this R model later on down the line. But currently for the 2021 Raptor that they've shown and revealed right now, the 3.5 EcoBoost is the only engine option. So I do kind of understand why Ford went this direction. The 3.5 EcoBoost is a very popular motor. Ford has done really well in their EcoBoost line of engines in general. And as far as trying to push for more power and better fuel economy, these motors make a lot of sense to get them the right EPA ratings that they need. So there are reasons that Ford chose to go this way. And I will say that the second gen Raptor was extremely quick. That high output EcoBoost engine has a lot of power and it is pretty fun. But I also definitely see the side of people wanting a V8. Normally, I wouldn't be on the bandwagon of like, oh, we got to have a good old-fashioned American V8 in there. It's not a real truck, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of nonsensical arguments about it, but as somebody who is privileged enough to drive both a Gen 1 and a Gen 2 Raptor for hundreds of miles and to have time in the seat, off-road and on-road, I can say that the Gen 2 is a lot more refined and a lot more powerful. It's definitely the quicker of the two trucks, but the Gen 1 is honestly a lot more fun. And if I was personally going to put out the money to buy one of those two trucks, I would probably option for a Gen 1, even if it was used, just because I like the feel of it so much more. That 6.2 just has the right kind of sound, the right kind of torque, and even though it's not as quick as the EcoBoost truck, it feels right when you drive it off-road, and it just is a little bit rowdier. It's a little less refined, and it keeps you in the mindset of I'm driving a truck, not just a really big luxury vehicle that's twin turbo that can move over dirt quick. So, like I said, there's something to be said for driving feel versus just all-out power numbers and specs, but it's not super surprising that Ford pushed for the EcoBoost nonetheless. Moving away from engine options now and talking about suspension, one of the biggest new changes to the Raptor that I did not see coming at all was Ford's move from a leaf-sprung rear end to a 5-link coil-sprung rear end with a panhard rod. This is a totally weird change that I did not think they were going to go for, because it starts to really separate the Raptor away from the F-150 to where it's really becoming its own model that is not just an amped up Baja version of the original F-150 truck. So with this, I know there's a lot of people that are holdouts that are going to wish that it still had a leaf sprung rear end, and there's a lot of criticism of leaf springs just work, why would you change it? And especially if it's a pickup truck, that's what makes the most sense. There's a reason that pretty much all half-ton, three-quarter-ton trucks and one-ton trucks have leaf-sprung rear ends. That's the standard for pickups that haul and do work. But with the Raptor, I think it makes a lot of sense to make this change. And David Tracy, who writes for Jalopnik, had a pretty good quote as to what this actually does and why it benefits the F-150. The way he describes it is that the key to a coil spring setup is the fact that it decouples lateral stiffness from spring rate, since the track bar, or the panhard rod, handles lateral loads, and the coil springs are then charged with simply suspending the vehicle. Leaf springs, on the other hand, must do it all, keep the axle centered with standing the lateral forces and also suspending the load. So basically what they're describing there is with a leaf spring, the truck is kind of having to fight to keep the axle in line as well as managing the up and down movement and suspending the weight of the truck and whatever's in the bed. Whereas with this coil spring suspension, there's room for a lot more articulation. The coil spring can be focused and tuned just to deal with the weight of the truck, and it's not centering the axle. That's where the 5-link part comes in, because that's what's actually positioning it and making sure that the axle isn't shifting around underneath the truck. So in an off-road sense, it makes a whole lot of sense. There's a reason now that Jeep's moved to all coil springs instead of the older leaf spring models, and pretty much all off-road focused vehicles run coils at this point. It's just a lot better if you want true off-road articulation and better traction in the rear end. So in the Raptor, I do think it makes a lot of sense, even if it sacrifices some of the true truck nature for it as a vehicle that's towing and hauling focused. The other change that comes along with this new rear end is obviously a new Fox suspension setup for the 3rd gen Raptor. And of course, they're sticking with Fox like they have with the previous generations, but now we're seeing the Livevalve shocks as standard, which means that they're electronically adjustable for the valving. And they're also a little bit bigger than a 3.0. I want to say that Ford listed it as a 3.1 or 3.2 inch diameter, something around those lines. So you're getting a massive shock body. There's a lot of fluid to move in there, and it's just kind of that continual progression towards a more and more capable Baja running style truck. That makes a lot of sense. With that being said, the Livevalve stuff is kind of interesting to me. I'll be definitely excited to try it out and see how this works, or see what people are able to do with it and how much of a difference that makes in different terrain modes, because it does change depending on how you set the truck for what terrain you're on, and you can kind of adjust to get the best ride possible for how you want to run the vehicle. But I also still have those concerns, sort of like I mentioned earlier with the EcoBoost motor, of adding more electronics and doodads and things in here that are very cool on the surface level and probably work really well while the truck's in warranty, but also raise some questions about how they're going to hold up once the truck is out of warranty and has spent some serious time in the dirt. There's a lot to be said for the simplicity of just having manual dials to adjust compression. Obviously, you can't do that just on the go from the cab, but being able to make suspension changes and not have to worry about electronics in between certainly feels a lot more reliable in the off-road world. So we'll see how that holds up. Once again, I can't pass judgment yet because we don't know anything about this truck in a long-term sense, but it is a really interesting idea, and the technology is certainly cool just from the standpoint of, man, that would be awesome to go off-road, switch it to Baja mode, and then hit some rocks and switch to a soft rock or sand mode or whatever it may be and get different performance out of it and feel a change in the truck. With all the mention of these terrain modes being tied to the Livevalve shocks, it is worth noting that Ford has put a lot more time into developing these and giving it more parameters to affect the vehicle. Early on, it seemed like these terrain modes in any brand's vehicles were kind of just a way to select a cool icon and feel like the truck was doing something different, and maybe it played with the way it read out traction control a little bit differently than it would normally, but I didn't think the changes were that dramatic, and realistically, if you know how to use four-wheel drive and you know the difference between 4 high and 4 low, and you can use a locker, you can get most places with that kind of skill and the ability to choose a line where the terrain mode doesn't make a difference. But now in these newer trucks, they are providing a lot more information on what it's doing and what it has access to, and we're seeing in these newer Raptors that those terrain modes now affect the ride quality, where the suspension sits or how it's valved. It's affecting the steering response, it's affecting things like the traction control, but also the drivetrain in terms of where the shift points are for the transmission or how high that motor is going to rev up before it shifts. So there's a lot of things going on to really kind of vary the way the truck performs between each of those modes, and it'll be interesting to try that out once we're able to get our hands on one and actually kind of cycle through it and see if we can feel those differences. But I do think this opens a lot of doors for people who are a lot more novice off-roaders and maybe don't have so much experience or don't know how to approach different terrains, such as sand versus mud versus actual rock crawling or just high speed running over forest roads or whatever it may be. So those things do kind of open the doors for people to maybe drive a bit more capably than they would just with their limited knowledge. And obviously there's potential there for it to help even skilled drivers drive a little bit better, or for the truck to accommodate the way they're driving better. So we'll see how that works down the road. Next up, I definitely want to touch on the new tire size options for the Raptor, and this is a pretty cool change. Now, in the past, the Raptors have always come with 35s from factory, or at least a tire that's very close to that. It's around 34.5 or slightly bigger. 35s have kind of been the standard on that truck, and a lot of people have wanted to upgrade to 37s, and so there's been changes in adding lifts, clearing more space in the fenders, figuring out what can be done with wheel offset to get that kind of tire to fit without just smashing up the fenders every time the truck articulates. But now Ford is offering 37s as a factory option. And with that upgrade, it's worth noting that you can still get a full-size spare on this truck. Both of those are really cool changes. I think a lot of guys are going to want to option for the 37s, partially just because it looks cool, but also you're getting a little more functionality there. You've obviously got even more sidewall on those tires to help cushion and eat up the bumps, more room to air down, and you're getting more true clearance underneath the vehicle because a tire is what's actually going to make that separation between where your axles and your arms are hanging down and where the rocks in the ground are making contact. So a lot of that is good reason to upgrade. But the interesting thing about the full-size spare is that it does change the back end of the truck a decent amount. So if you purchase a truck that comes with 35s, it'll hold a full 35-inch spare underneath, but you won't have the space to run a 37. There's actual changes that happen within the frame in the back and the shape of the bumper that Ford did to accommodate a full 37-inch spare. So if you go for that upgrade, your truck is cut out a little bit differently or warped a little differently in the back for that to fit underneath, which is just kind of an interesting note, but I do appreciate that Ford put the time in to make that work, because having a full-size spare is so crucial on a four-wheel drive vehicle. I know a lot of people that do not run full-size spares, and it's just a nightmare when you get into a bind, whether it be out in the desert or on a trail or anywhere else, where you got a busted tire and now you're having to try and swap around or avoid putting power to the axles that have that tire because you don't want those wheels spinning at a different ratio. It's just a total disaster, and you should have a full-size spare. So this makes a lot of sense. Really good call from Ford, and I'm super excited that that 37 is an option. Now, coming back around full circle to talking a little bit in the realm of the engine options I spoke about earlier in the video, Ford did a lot of work redesigning the exhaust on this new F-150, and it's kind of interesting what went into it. The idea is that they wanted something that sounded a lot more proper for an off-road desert running truck, and maybe gets a little bit closer to that V8 sound that everyone wanted, which I think is a noble goal. Like I said, there's reasons that Ford went for the 3.5, and unfortunately it just does not have a good sound. Even in my Tremor with that 3.5 EcoBoost running some different exhausts on there like the MBRP and Stainless Works and things like that, you can get a louder sound but not necessarily a better sound all the time. It's just, the motor just isn't that way, and a V6 is never going to sound the same as a big 6.2 V8 like the first gen had. So what Ford did to kind of help accommodate this and try and make it a little bit nicer to listen to is they came up with a kind of custom 3-inch exhaust that is a equal dual length kit. So both sides, since it's dual exit out the rear, run the same length, and the way they accomplish this is by creating a sort of trombone loop around the other end of the exhaust. So one pipe runs a little bit more directly and traditionally like you expect, and the other loops around it briefly before continuing down the back of the truck, which is a really strange looking design, but it creates that equal length for a better sound. And they also give you the ability now to adjust exhaust sound through the baffling system that they have in there. So you have the option between quiet, normal, sport, and Baja modes on that. And obviously it's basically just an increase in the volume for the most part of whether you're gonna have it be very quiet or a bit louder and rowdier, depending on the situation or how you wanna run the vehicle. But all this is pretty nice to have. I think it'll make people a little more accommodating to the EcoBoost motor because it doesn't sound quite as wonky as the previous generation did. And you have the ability to shut it up if you don't want to listen to it. So definitely another smart move on Ford's part. It's kind of interesting that they spent that much time in it, but I think it shows that Ford did have some sensitivity to what people were saying about the previous generation of truck, and they're making the right moves to kind of accommodate that. So overall, to kind of wrap things up and put a bow on it, obviously I'm pretty excited about this new generation of Raptor. I do like to see that Ford is pushing the technology, continuing to grow the platform, and still continuing to build the Raptor, especially in a world where electric vehicles and alternative fuels are getting more and more popular, and there's maybe not the same love or push for the off-road world that there was in previous years. The Raptor, I think, has really created a unique market, and now we're even seeing competition rise up to meet it from things like that Ram T-Rex or TRX, however you want to brand that are more factory sort of quote unquote Baja ready, but just off-road specific built trucks that you can buy off the lot. And it does kind of create an area where now, because these things are being built and Ford and these other companies are working on this off-road technology, there's more space for those improvements to trickle down to trucks in the lineup over time, in the same way that a lot of luxury vehicles have new tech on them that seems unfathomable or couldn't be afforded at the moment, but in a couple of years become standard. So we're moving towards that rate of creating trucks that are more and more capable out of the box off-road just by having these sorts of models around, and that I like to see. As a side note though, I do think Ford should come out with a budget version of the Raptor that's a lot more stripped down, doesn't have all the luxury items, but does have the same kind of suspension and the same platform, so you could buy a very off-road capable truck with less leather and electronic doodads in it that's a little bit more affordable and probably has the V8 as opposed to the turbocharged motor, and just kind of find a more entry-level area for people to get into the Raptor name. I highly doubt Ford will ever come out with a truck that fits that description, but nonetheless, I'm still excited about where the Raptor is going, and I think we have a lot to look forward to with the Raptor R as well. So we may be bringing you guys an update video once we find out more information there and Ford has revealed a bit more of where they're going in that direction. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you found this video entertaining or at least slightly informative and just giving you some details on where this next generation is going. So I do appreciate you guys taking the time, and we will see you next time.